testing the waters. So, you want to start a business. You think you know who your customers are. How do you actually get started?
That's a really good question. I think it brings to the conflict of, should I build and then they come, or should I wait till they come to build?
Let's talk about it. Welcome to another episode of Horses with Horns. I'm Indranil.
I'm Nicholas.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about taking the next step of, you want to start a business. You might have done some work to figure out who your customers could be, what they might want, but, how do you know that you can actually take that next step? How do you build for them? So today we're going to talk about that, about what are some of those early steps, what are some of the ways that you can test out your idea, and how do you know if this is something that you actually want to take further and do this as a company?
It's a funny anecdote, just kind of going off the title of this episode. On a trip, I went back to my native country of Peru. And I went to a city that I've never been to before on the coastline, in the state. Well, they don't call them states. Province maybe is a better name. The province of Ica. And I went on this pier. It's a little south of Lima, which is where I am from. And went on this pier, kind of walked. The only way to get in the ocean was by walking on this pier and then jumping in the water, because there was no sand. It was just rocks.
It was just pure and then straight into the water.
Yeah. So I jumped, and I think to this day I've never been in colder water ever. Like, it was, and even after swimming for 5-10 minutes, you never got used to it.
Just cold forever.
Yeah. So I'm just saying that because that was a really good moment where I should have tested it. I just never expected it to be so cold. That was insane. But anyway.
All right. So,
anecdote.
Anecdote, but probably a fairly timely intro to this episode, where building a business is difficult. Whether it is joining an early stage company or building out something from scratch, it can be daunting. It can be really tricky to understand, is this going to work? How do we get this off the ground? And especially, if you don't have a lot of money, which I would say the vast majority of businesses when they start out, they don't. What is that like then, jumping directly into the water? Because that might be the only way.
Yeah, going off of my example earlier, can you really test the waters? You can touch it and you can kind of get a feel of what it's like, but you're not swimming, right? And starting a business, really starting it, it's about swimming. And maybe you'll be able to swim really well or okay, you'll stay afloat, but you have to do some form of swimming. And for that, you have to jump in, So I would say that the real test is finding a way to get in the water. And with the limited, budget that some of us have, how do you do that well? Mark Cuban, hopefully he's been consistent about this. I've only seen it on one interview. He said that he doesn't recommend founders to raise money. He recommends to bootstrap only, right? And of course, for a lot of us that don't have the money to necessarily do that, that seems very difficult. But, I'm not recommending either or. But what I will say, though, is that there is something to that, because I call them hiccups, right? You're caught in this cycle. You're caught in this cycle, and nothing's going to change, right? Nothing's going to, it's like, for instance, you try to get that entry-level job that requires 3 years of experience, but you don't have them, you're at zero. And you're caught in a cycle that there's no way out. Yes, you're right. Until there's a hiccup, until there's something that is not the norm that happens. And you have to be ready for that opening, and, maybe someone, or maybe it's people you started talking to, or presenting an opportunity that maybe you come in as an intern and then you become a full-time employee. You have to find those hiccups, because we're many times we're caught in these cycles of, I want to jump in, but I don't know how to swim.
Yeah, That indecision though is probably one of the things to avoid as much as possible. I feel like, so jumping in is important, but I think what we can really frame this whole episode about is that when you're testing the waters, continuing that analogy right there, there are different levels to it. You don't have to jump off that pier into ice cold water. I feel like actually, what is the way to get in the water without drowning, without freezing? Can you ease yourself into it?
Yeah. Just looking back on my own experience, I think this is when the idea of a product could start as a service and could start in a consulting capacity. Because in many ways, when you're consulting, you are designing a one-off solution for someone, theoretically, right? So that gives you the opportunity of describing something that doesn't exist and selling the idea to someone else. As we talked in the previous episodes, you can talk to someone that is that already has a relationship with you and trusts you enough to say, yeah, I understand where you're going. I understand the vision. And I trust that you're building towards this, or that you're going to be able to put it together, even if it's very manually. But at first, I think you can start on that one-off. Don't build yet. Just make sure that it happens in some way, without making a deep commitment to an infrastructure, to your business, or to your solution.
Yeah. So we'll talk about the concept of an MVP in a little bit. So an MVP is a minimal viable product. It's basically, it barely works. It is just the minimal thing that you can do to even demonstrate your solution. But I think you bring up a good point that you can probably even do some work before an MVP where it's not even a product. It is just whatever problem you're trying to solve, do it in the hackiest way possible where you probably can't repeat it. Like, it's not scalable at all.
Right. Not sure if this is a great analogy, but let's say and I go back to this a lot. Let's say you want to open up a laundromat. Maybe instead of putting all the investment in having real estate, before you do that, you can always start with pick up and drop off, and you can even wash at other existing laundromats. You can wash it probably, I think, in your house. Is that legal?
I'm not sure, but probably safer than the food business.
Right. So, there's many ways where you can test it and where you can see exactly what's going to work, and I think this happens a lot. My wife and I were driving, I think maybe 2 weeks ago. And, we live in a pretty fairly urban part of New Jersey. And when we were driving, we noticed there's a nail salon every half a block. There's another one.
I feel like that's coming up in New York City too. There's just nail salons everywhere.
And with brick and mortar, I often wonder, do people just open up the place because they feel like the business model's already been validated, so they can open it and people will see it and they'll walk in for that service? Or is there a way to have that MVP, proof of concept way, or you have to go full in? What do you think?
I mean, let's talk about that a bit more. So again, like, the concept of an MVP is, this is the absolute minimum that you can do to show what you're trying to build. So, like in a nail salon, it might be like, can I do nails for one person? Like, not even a salon. You don't have a store. You don't have a location. You don't have a team. It's literally you going maybe door to door with a kit and just like, can I do your nails?
Yeah. And I think often business owners think that, if they have very visible a very visible office space, business place, then people will show up magically.
They also think maybe like that's credibility or something. It's like, oh, I have an office, so
right.
I'm real.
Right, but in my experience, if you cannot get the customers in the more dedicated, targeted way, the more general way of setting up the environment for them to come to you, that's probably not going to work.
Yeah. I mean, if you're, again, using that example of going door to door, if people are saying, I have no interest even in the concept of your service, imagine if I'm paying $90,000 a month in rent for something that no one wants.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, there's a lot of intricacies that kind of come into particular businesses and different industries. Kind of going back to probably what we are more familiar with in the technology world. The good thing is that so much of it is, building in the technology world is, of course, cheaper. Technology bricks are just cheaper.
Software anyway. I mean, like it's worth mentioning that certain things like biotech, for example, very long tail, probably needs sometimes hundreds of millions before it ever sees a customer.
That's true.
So like narrow it down, SaaS basically.
Yeah, research heavy, probably total different ball game.
Yeah.
But going back to the MVP desire of having something that works, but is the bare minimum, right? I think definitely the first thing to focus on, I think, is that a good way to determine what to build first is to say, what's the least I can do to bring results, to solve the problem that my potential customer segment wants to have solved. What's the minimum infrastructure that I need? I think even if it requires a lot of manual work, or nothing is as automated as it could be, what's the very minimum? What's the very minimum so that the solution is built? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me of the time where we were working together way back, and we were past the MVP stage as a company, but even when designing new services or just even internal process, it was, our CEO told us, and this was really great advice, don't do things that are repeatable at the start. Like, just do it once, hacky, solve your problem. Then write down the process, like what did you do, think about the steps, and then think about it. Like, think about what you can automate, think about how you can make it easier for yourself. And then from there, you can build it out. Because sometimes you'll find that, it might be even just a one-off task or a one-off thing. Is it even a deep problem worth solving? And if you go too deep, it's not worth putting in the effort of building it out.
For sure. Shout out to Josh Holzman. I think he came up with it in the same way. Maybe I added a few things to it, but the idea was first you do it manually, then you build it into an operation. You build a step-by-step, a defined step-by-step, especially that you can delegate to someone else. So once you figure out what the manual stage looks like, and you are able to say, okay, document it, these are the steps you follow to accomplish this service, this solution. Especially, I think a good test is, can you delegate it? Can you give it to someone else?
Can somebody else do the process?
Exactly. And once you've gone through that, and probably at that stage, that's where you're hitting a good volume of work where you can see what works and what doesn't work. And then you can think about productizing it, and say, okay, because once you go into a product and once you build it, changing and creating flexibility in that environment, much more difficult. The investment into creating the product is significant. But if it works, and nothing's going to work perfectly or for everybody, but if it mostly works, you need all those testing moments prior to that.
Yeah, I actually feel like that's the good inflection point. So when you're designing your MVP, start simple. Like you know what problem you're trying to solve, strip it down, just think about what is the absolute bare minimum that we need to do it. And then if you have enough people that want that solution, and it's becoming annoying to try and serve all of them, that's the inflection point of like, okay, let's build this into a product. Let's start talking to them and think, what can we add onto this?
Right. So for instance, look at us right now. This is our MVP, right? These microphones, these black cover books.
Really great stand right here.
Yes. So this is our MVP, right? This is what we consider, this is the minimum to get started. And to be honest, if it were any better, we would probably be hiring someone or requesting services to someone that's, an audio visual kind of expert, much more knowledgeable than we are. But that wouldn't make it an MVP, and that would make heavy investment in the beginning. And in fact, one of the things that you probably noticed is that our guests are not with us in real time, because that adds another technical point of failure. We bring someone real time. Now we have to worry, okay, well, are we going to be sharing video? Okay, now I have to have my Wi-Fi on. What if this happens? What if that person's late? A million things. So our guests have been kind enough to pre-record to insert it later on, and thus reducing points of failure. And I think that's another thing to keep in mind. It's like, how can you build something simple so that you don't create a lot of situations for things to go wrong, for things to kind of break.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, I mean, like, first of all, when you're building out an MVP, the thing barely works, and that's fine. Like, that's intentional. You're building something that is just getting your point across. After that, when you take that next step, that's when you can start adding features. You start to solve other people's problems, whatever helps you get to market. But if you overcomplicate your first product, that means, first, now that's more for you to explain. Mm-hmm. And two, that's just more things that are going to break on something that you probably already built with very limited resources.
Very much, and just to kind of share a little bit more of this journey, some of the other things that we consider is like, should we do it remotely? Should Indranil be home? Should I be home? Should we do it like that? Should we do it with low tech? Should we just do it with our computer's microphone? Should we do it live? Live had an interesting appeal to me, because then you didn't have to edit, and once you hit let's go live, that was it. For whatever reason, we decided, okay, this is gonna be our minimum. This is how we're gonna hit the market. This is how we're hitting, and trying to get in touch with all of you. But as soon as we understand more of where the podcast is going and what all of you care about, those things are going to drive change.
Yeah, which I think goes to the next point here of, you've built out something. Maybe you have some users, or in this case, maybe we have some viewers and listeners. How do we know if we want to take it further? Like, what is the next step even?
So I think you don't know.
That's fair.
Because just because it worked up to this point, and again, back to something we talked about in episode 1, what is work? What does work mean? Just because it worked up to this point, just because it feels like it's going well, it doesn't mean necessarily that the next step will be equally safe or a guaranteed success. To go back to my original story, there is, I think it's, if I remember correctly, I forget if it's Seagirt, New Jersey, or if it's what's the other town? Silver Lake? No. Am I getting that right? I forget. But
I don't know much about Jersey.
Yeah, that's okay. Once you start going into the ocean, it's pretty flat up to a point. And it's interesting because it there's this hole, and you definitely have to know how to swim. But then it comes back up and then it's flat again. So even if you start taking little steps, who knows when there's going to be a big dip, and it may come up again later, but you have to, your previous step is not a guarantee of the next. And I think the way to think about it, and even for small and bigger companies, is that you're always sampling. You're just increasing the sample size.
True. And I feel like that's actually a really good point on, I don't know why I'm thinking of this, but like when you're thinking about falling into the hole, to me that kind of makes me think of, you now have users, you have people who are giving you feedback. And one of the important things to remember when you're building something new is, again, it probably doesn't work all that well. Negative feedback is not a bad thing. If you have people who are taking time to give you feedback, positive or negative, it means that they care. It means that they are potentially your first customers who will be paying for things.
Mm-hmm.
And like even here on this podcast, if you tell us you hate it, I'll take it. That means we have listeners. We have people who are taking the time to watch us and to give us something.
Yeah. I mean, getting feedback, I think, is already a good sign, because that means you have the engagement and you've found a good way to make some people pay attention, you know? And I think at the very least, that means that you have a very well-defined brand that maybe people don't like, but they understand. And being understood is already half the battle, at least, if not more. You know, and when you get into the building of an MVP of what the original product looks like, even if it fails, you know, as long as people knew where you were going with it and they can give you feedback so that you can fix it and take it to the next step, that's fine, you know. And even if it did work and it was successful with a control sample size and you want to take it to many more people, you probably find and learn new things that, you know, the original group of people didn't give you.
Yeah, and you know, this came up a lot in our last episode as well, where if you're newer to the market, you're building something new, an MVP is kind of like a fact-finding mission. You're trying to understand what the problem actually is. Just because you had an idea and you're going out to market with it doesn't necessarily mean that your customers agree with the problem. They have their own problem. They will help you find it, and you might find that you end up building something totally different than you started with.
Yeah, you know, as a funny anecdote, a few years ago when we were working together, long story short, my mom cooked and I would sell lunch to my coworkers. And, you know, it was interesting to see, because to me, I always thought my mom was a good cook. And I think, of course, there's a heavy bias in that, but
it is good.
Thank you. But I, you know, I had other people's opinions. So I always regarded my mom's cooking, I think objectively, a little above average. When other people at work especially started to try it, it was interesting to see, you know, they were very defined meals, very defined dishes that everybody went like, this is the best one. And I would have never, you know, and they try maybe like 10 to 15 different ones from her cooking. And there were things that I thought, you know, maybe this one's a little bit more obscure. Maybe people are not going to like this one, but people actually liked it. You know, but it was interesting to see, wow, this meal is the one that people preferred. But it was also interesting to learn other facts about, you know, okay, did they want to buy lunch from me made by my mom every day? No, they only wanted it once a week. And I think especially people in the city pre-COVID, one of the things that they liked about stepping out of the office is, where are we going to eat? You know, what different can I try?
Yeah, or even literally getting to step out of the office. Like, this is obviously very specific, but getting lunch back in those days was sometimes less about getting lunch, and it was literally just like, let me get away from my desk for a bit.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, you know, and it's things that seem logical, but, you know, it's something that I really, really realized when I saw it in action. And just because they didn't want the food that my mom made every day, it didn't mean they didn't like it. You know, it just meant that the real overall solution to their lunch experience was much greater, and it required more participants than just one cook.
Right. And also that you kind of, like, through this MVP process, small group, you realize that there's actually two problems. It's not just about getting food. It is also the secondary problem of, I would like to get away from my desk.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
you know,
very
you couldn't
much
solve that with just one product.
Exactly. Experience. Yeah, you know, those were things that I realized through this moment. Unfortunately, I was not able to take it further. To be honest, I don't even know why.
Well, I haven't been to the office in over a year, so
Yeah, that's a big one. Though I do know a friend of ours actually working at a different company. I think they had an in-house chef, and he said he kind of got tired of it. Interestingly, and he said he actually missed my mom's cooking. You know, and something else. Not to talk about this one experience that much, but something else that a lot of people I think really liked about it is that in New York City, a lot of my coworkers in their 20s, they really didn't eat homemade that often, and
New York City people don't cook.
yeah, so it was also interesting. I think a lot of what they liked was like, wow, this tastes homemade, and I hadn't tried homemade food in such a long time, and I think I there is a homemade taste to the food. I mean, I can fry a couple things, put it on a plate, and eat it, but that doesn't necessarily make it homemade. I think there's something else to it, right? But that another learning that I didn't know other people found valuable.
Yeah, and all from like 5 people in one small office eating lunch.
Yeah, great experience. Great experience. Anyway, so today we actually have a contributor to this episode, good friend, Digant. He has a lot of product experience. He has years and years of experience really finding the value of a business offer to its desired market. And he has a lot to contribute and a lot to say about this topic. Let's listen to him.
Hi, my name is Digant Davé, and I'm principal and founder of Next Horizon Consulting, a consultancy that helps startups and entrepreneurs find product market fit and scale their business. As an entrepreneur or a founding team, you have really 2 main goals. Number 1 is finding product market fit for the product or service that you're building. And the second one is figuring out how to build a sustainable business, finding a business model that can generate consistent revenue and eventually get you to profitability. One of the best ways to do that is to actually test your idea in the marketplace with an MVP or minimum viable product. When you're starting off as an entrepreneur, a lot of your business model and business plan is based on a lot of assumptions. And so the goal of a minimum viable product or a minimum lovable product is to really de-risk the assumptions or validate or invalidate some of the assumptions that you're using to build your product and build your business. And so this can take a lot of different forms. And it really depends on the type of product you're building and the nature of the team that you're working with. So probably the best solution is to have your MVP be a piece of working software that you can actually put in front of your users and get real validation from. But if you have a non-technical founding team, you can also leverage prototypes or other methods to put your idea and your concepts in front of real users and let them tell you whether they think the product that you're envisioning is going to help them solve their pain points and address the needs that they're looking to address. If one of the founders is a technical founder, you can actually go and build software, build working software, and put it in front of people and get feedback. But nowadays, with a lot of low-code apps and AI tools, you can also leverage prototypes or prototyping tools like Figma or InVision to create clickable mockups and prototypes that, if done well, can mimic or simulate the feeling of the actual product or service that you're looking to create. And so it really comes down to how much time you have and what the makeup of your team is. For people who are non-technical, sometimes hiring a designer, hiring engineers to build working software can be very costly and time consuming. And if you haven't validated the desirability of your product with users, you may end up building something and then finding out that the feedback you're getting from users is actually very different than what you thought your initial product should be. So in that case, it might be better to use tools to kind of build prototypes and mock-ups. And some of these tools are simple enough for you to learn and use yourself, like Balsamiq. Balsamic's a really great wireframing tool that kind of looks like hand sketches. If you're a little more sophisticated than that, you can use Figma, or there's a whole host of different AI tools that are coming out, and low-code tools like Glide or Bubble that you can use to actually build works like mobile and web applications that kind of simulate the user experience of the product that you're eventually looking to build. So as we talked about, the goal of an MVP is to test your assumptions. And you can really think about three main categories of assumptions: desirability, feasibility, and viability. And these come from design thinking, but desirability is really about how useful is the product or solution that you're building. So is it solving a need or a pain point that your target users have? Feasibility, like the name suggests, is what you're looking to build, is it within your capabilities? Is it something that can be done technically and with the team that you have to work with? And viability, again, kind of speaks to that business model. So can you generate recurring revenue? And can you build a sustainable business model around that? So building a MVP, so really your goal should be putting that MVP in front of customers and then deciding whether you should continue to build the product or service that you're looking to build, whether you're learning things that invalidate some of your assumptions about whether what you're building is actually useful in helping your target users solve the needs that they're trying to address. And then secondly, is it something that is it viable? Is it something people are willing to pay for to help them solve that need? Do they see enough value that they're willing to spend money on it? If the answer to both of those questions is no, it's probably a good time to stop. If you gain some insights about the problem being something that people are looking to solve, but maybe the approach that you've taken is not exactly the one that resonates with your target users, it might be a good time to pivot and think about rescoping your either the solution that you've come up with, or really going back and thinking about the problem and making sure that you're really solving the right problem for your users.
Digant, thank you so much for contributing. A lot of good stuff, a lot of good material.
Yeah, super insightful. Thank you very much for your time and for your trust. We're early on in building out this podcast, kind of in our MVP stage. So thank you again.
I just to highlight a couple of things. I really like that he used the word assumptions a lot. And I really think that's a healthy and probably will keep you less stressed if you go into your new business knowing that everything is an assumption.
Knowing that you don't know.
Yeah. If you think you know, that's going to be very stressful, because you're on the road for a lot of disappointment. And assumptions it's realistic and it's healthy.
Yeah. I feel like going off of that, if you are going in with the assumption that you know for sure, and then your customers don't respond to you the way that you want them to, then that's when you're going to get disappointed. If you go in with the mentality of, I need to learn, I need to test out, is what I'm saying making sense? Then, you either build what you wanted to build when you started, or you discover a new set of problems and you might be able to build something for that.
Definitely. I also, just to add a little bit to what he said for non-technical founders, in my opinion, I think that's actually a blessing, because when you happen to be technical and you start kind of designing solutions or building, you have this natural instinct to do it yourself, and you end up wasting time, focus. I've talked to other people that they started doing it on their own, and after a year they realized maybe I should have hired someone else to do this, and I should have focused about these other things. He said, as a founder, you really have, two very defined goals: market fit, and how do you do this sustainably? You don't have to do it yourself. In fact, if you are technical, force yourself to not do it, because you're going to be spending time on the wrong things.
Yeah. I think one other really good point is talking about product market fit. So that's something that usually comes up after your MVP. It's actually usually probably going to be closer to Series A, if not Series B. So like a pretty well-established company. I myself, I work in FP&A, which is financial planning and analysis, and I kind of work on that type of stuff of validating assumptions. I spend a lot of time with our product and marketing teams where even though the company I work for, well established, we have tons of customers and revenue, we're still validating assumptions. Anytime we want a new product launch, we're kind of taking that MVP approach of test it out, ask your customers, do they want this thing?
For sure. I think it is very healthy. And I've had this vision, having been on the analytical side of companies over the course of my career. I have this idea of the main object, for those that know a little bit about data, the main object in your database should be a table called tests. And everything you can do test one. What is test one? And associate all actions and all metrics and everything, every other piece of data in your company associated to test one. You run test two and associate it to all of those things, because ultimately, I think a big portion of running a business is how are our tests going?
Yeah, I think that is a really great way to sum it up, where big company, small company, whatever it is, whether you're just getting started or not, it really is just a series of tests. You don't know a lot for sure. So, go through the process, do as little as you can at the start, and then just continue to test your assumptions.
Couldn't agree more.
Cool. Well, thank you again for joining us week 3. Looking forward to seeing you next week.
See you soon.